to unpack this challenging issue. That's our submission, and happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Right, are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Paul.
Thank you for that. That was really insightful. Do you guys have a stance on the cycleway investment? Would you like that to be full scale, or just given that it's kind of recreational as well?
In our submission, we have supported your stance, and the reason for that is twofold. One is we absolutely recognise that the challenges council is under in terms of infrastructure build. But we also recognise that it's a massive statement that you're making in terms of the need for infrastructure that increases physical activity. I would just say as a caveat for Sport New Zealand that active transport doesn't sit under our remit, it sits under NZTA, but certainly from a physical activity perspective, anything that gets families and people recreating, obviously we're supportive of.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? No, it's been very clear. Thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, there's a baby arrived. So actually that's really timely because we've just got a break. So I was going to suggest that we come back at 10 to, please, promptly. That gives us 15 minutes, which should allow for a little bit of baby Right, we'll make a start again. So I would like to invite to the table, please, Matthias Corwin. Do we have Matthias in the room? No? Okay. Barbara McKenzie. Hello, Barbara. Thank you for being prepared to come a little bit earlier. And we look forward to hearing what you've got to say. I don't think you've presented to us before, have you? So it's 5 minutes. The time is up there on the display there. And I can wave at you and give you a sign when there's a minute to go, if you'd like. The time does go by very, very quickly. And if you want us to be able to ask questions, you have to allow a little bit of time within that 5-minute slot.
Okay.
So the floor is yours.
Well, thanks very much for this opportunity. I suggested in my written submission that Council should make more effort, pay more attention to fiscal responsibility. Given that the economy has taken a hit from the COVID response, it seems appropriate to show restraint at this time, rather than borrowing and taxing to finance vanity projects, which are often ill-advised. The library in Civic Square. Okay, the council ostensibly aspires to a vibrant city. Now, this would be better achieved by creating Civic Square as an attractive meeting place, rather than through child-friendly cafes and elimination of our back gardens. The council has an opportunity to make Civic Square a major focus and a desirable meeting point in the city. The library should be rebuilt so it faces Civic Square rather than a very dreary part of Victoria Street, and council offices should be replaced with shops and eateries. Cycleways, as we all know, the council's cycleway projects are expensive, ill thought out, dangerous to cyclists and frustrating to motorists. As a very regular cyclist, I try to avoid them. The council's number 4, zero carbon. The council's zero carbon policy is unmitigated nonsense on multiple fronts. The policy relies on debunked research from the 19th century, claiming to show that atmospheric CO2 leads to runaway global warming, especially the tiny percentage contributed by human activity. Looking at geological history, it is apparent that we're still at a low point in terms of temperature and atmospheric CO2. There's no reason to believe that humanity's contribution to atmospheric CO2 has brought us to crisis point, or indeed that additional CO2, or greater warmth for that matter, will be anything but beneficial. Regardless, New Zealand is a carbon sink. There's plenty of research that shows that grass actually absorbs more carbon than monoculture pine, particularly if the pine is constantly milled. It's totally ridiculous that it should aspire to offset the activities of big manufacturers like India and China. China is in the process of building 200 new coal-fired power stations. So to compensate, New Zealand wants to stop the use of clean-burning natural gas and rely on coal as a backup. If the council were serious about the environment, they wouldn't have replaced trolley buses with battery-powered vehicles. Batteries are unsustainable and an environmental disaster from mining to disposal. I've had no answer from councillors to my concerns about battery recycling. There's also the question of child exploitation in lithium mines. Is the council insisting on ethically sourced lithium batteries? A lot of these problems could be resolved in time, but why jump the gun? Why not wait until they're resolved? It's a serious matter that so much of the council's decision-making is based on dubious projections. Take, for example, its claim that 30 centimetres of sea level rise is expected to occur in New Zealand over the next 40 years. Data from the world's best, most reliable long-term coastal tide gauges indicate that the global average rate of sea level change is around 1.4 to 1.5 millimetres per annum and decelerating. In the New Zealand context, Otago University School of Surveying, and along with, in collaboration with GNS New Zealand, found an analysis an average annual sea rise of 0.9 millimetres over 4 main centres once subsidence is taken into account. So we're talking about a couple of inches in 40 years. Less of deceleration continues, and this is ignoring the possibility of a major earthquake which will raise the land, almost inevitably raise the land in Wellington. The council should not be spending money or making zoning changes or making any other decisions based on junk science.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Councillor Pannett.
Thanks for your submission. Can I just ask, have you got any scientific qualifications? No. I was just wondering. Right, so I was just curious about your assertion that it was junk science. On what basis, have you got some evidence around that?
On the one hand, I have explained that there's numerous sources that show that sea level. I've talked about sea level. I don't want to reiterate that. On the other, there's a huge amount of unreliable sources out there. The professor of oceanography, Peter Wadhams at Cambridge University, claimed that the Arctic was going to melt by 2017. There are a lot of, just at an intuitive level, I would think any sensible person would be smelling a rat.
Thank you. Look, I'm sorry, I've been a tiny bit distracted. Councillor Rusher will allow a question.
Very quickly, thanks, Barbara. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Sean.
Yeah, okay. Barbara, just interested, can you give me a reference to that Otago University research?
Not now.
Okay.
But
We'll follow up at a later time. I'll be interested to see that.
I included a screenshot which was from them that they presented.
Oh, perfect.
Okay. And just for thank you, and I'll just tell people that that's on page 91 of our papers, so we'll probably be able to track it down from them. But
Okay.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Okay. Right. So moving along, Neil Deans. Is Neil here?
2 points to make on the long-term plan. I guess the main one, or the first one, is about cycleways, and I guess I'm a reasonably geriatric cyclist, but I do go from Kandara, and my neighbour, of course, has just presented to you, into town every day, and appreciate the work that the council's done in improving cycleways. I think it's good in some areas. It's quite patchy, however, and one of my concerns is that I cycle across the CBD every day, and that's somewhat challenging. And I'm pleased to see that the work that Let's Get Wellington Moving is doing, for example, on the Hutt Road, which is one of the areas that I use, that they propose to do. I think it's great. And I think the council, if it's serious about its infrastructure desires, needs to be thinking carefully about how these things get integrated. Having travelled overseas, places like Germany, there are some very good cycleways that they've built into old centres. I realise there are constraints in the central part of Wellington, but I think if you've got plans, you can implement those over time. The other point that I wanted to refer to is about stormwater, and it is an issue for Wellington City Council. We're fortunate to have a stream adjacent to our property, and we've been quite concerned to see the quality of the water coming into that stream from the stormwater network. I'd say that most Wellington residents don't realise that the stormwater finishes up in their local streams. Our stream has quite high biodiversity values. It is adjacent to council reserve, and we'd certainly like to see those, the fish and other things retained in the stream. And I think it's important that the council recognises its planning system and its consenting RMA processes and so on do have a bearing on the quality of the water in the stream. I'd certainly like to see that well integrated. And I guess the key point is that requires clarity on how to have water-sensitive urban design, etc. I work in the freshwater field and have done for decades across the country, And I'm conscious that places like Auckland are spending an awful lot of ratepayers' money trying to do things like daylight streams. And I'm not suggesting necessarily we do that, but we have a number of very valuable waterways in Wellington now, which are real assets to the community. And I think that we should, as best we can, try and retain that rather than trying to retrofit or reinstate. And I think that's doable. So I would urge you to consider that, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Pennant.
I found your last comment interesting. So you don't think we should really try hard to invest in daylighting streams?
I'm not saying that it shouldn't be done.
Yeah.
I am conscious that in the doing of it, I'm conscious a lot of areas like Kent Terrace and so on, that is an old waterway. It would be a major task, and I think you do have to balance up the costs of that work as against the benefits. My main issue is that in the densification of Wellington, which will be happening, and it's an obligation that you have to provide for, that you have to be sensitive to the implications of increasing hard surfaces and the like, and also recognising that in planning you need to recognise that the areas adjacent to streams need to be provided for. And it's a great challenge, I understand that. And so coming back to your question, I would say that in general, if you can avoid the need to have to daylight, that would be good. In certain circumstances, it may be valid, but it's extremely expensive, and it's much better avoided than it is, I guess, having to cure something is better than, avoiding it is better than having to cure it.
Okay. And sorry, are you an engineer or a planner?
No, my background's in biology. I'm originally a wildlife and fisheries biologist.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. I'm really stoked to see your submission here today. I've been looking into Te Mane o Te Wai and how we protect our water. I'm interested if you have any feedback, because daylighting streams is quite a popularised way of water management, but other nature-based solutions, or do you have any advice in terms of best practice with urban design or built environment or stormwater management that you can shed on?
Well, look, I think the main thing here is to be clear on your objectives. And when you have public spaces, such as waterways, such as reserves and so on, you can build around those. And that means you've got to have setbacks from certain types of development. You can have, Wellington's challenging because of its steep topography. So I'm not saying it's easy. But the other thing I think you can do is there could be greater recognition of the fact that our gutters run into streams, and those streams hold value. The rest of the country undertakes, for example, just community group work to try and identify that your stream runs to your gutters run to streams, and that can be done with community support. So I think a lot of that awareness would help.
Thank you, and we have actually run out of time, but that's been very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity.
I'll just check if Matthias Corwin has arrived. I don't think so, looking at the group. Okay. Jill Ford, is she here? We might be running a little bit ahead of ourselves actually now, but not a lot. The Environmental Reference Group. My apologies. It's an organisation you've presented to us before, so you know the drill. It's 10 minutes and that needs to include questions, so welcome.
Yes, I'm not going to actually speak for very long. I'm just going to follow on from Neil. Environmental Reference Group really wants some accelerated investment in your three waters, mostly to try and fix, as well as the sewage issue and the fresh water. It's the stormwater that we want the acceleration in. The infill housing and the constant covering of surfaces is really damaging the waterways in particular. So that's the first point. And, Auckland's had it for donkey's years, a requirement for no increase in stormwater flow from properties when people do things. So Wellington's harder in some ways, but it's certainly not impossible. There's things like permeable paving you could use instead of concrete and asphalt. Jumping down a bit, we don't support the deferral of footpath upgrades. You know, we want people to walk, and the footpaths are really not very good. So to defer, like I just walked up Woodward Street, and, you know, it's terrible. There's a lump of wood in the middle of the steps because the paving stone's fallen out. You know, it's really not particularly good. It's very uneven, so we don't support the deferral. We also want an accelerated cycleways program. You know, we need to be able to cycle safely in Wellington. And I think, from memory, Wellington has some of the worst accident rates in the country. So we need an updated cycleway implementation plan. The other thing, the minor projects fund for transport and cycleways, double it, go from 1 to 2 million. It can make a huge difference, these little things. I was involved in a project in Nelson years ago, and it was $1 million for little things, and it was connecting a bit of cycleway where there was just 10 metres unconnected, doing an extra drop curb, doing an extra pedestrian refuge, putting lights on a pedestrian crossing. They were little things, and it made a huge difference. And as well as, obviously, it's healthier to walk and cycle, it also helps your zero carbon goals. And with the number of people coming into Wellington, clearly we can't keep increasing the number of vehicles. Civics precinct, we didn't think there was enough information actually to come to a conclusion. What we want is a full life cycle carbon analysis of those buildings, preferably by third party, using best practice. And then you can make a sensible decision on what to do about it. Apparently there's a workshop on Saturday that I couldn't go to looking at some of the issues. Sewage sludge. Try to use the alternative funding because it will increase Wellington City Council's financial resilience. Get it off your books if you can. Biodiversity. There's quite a lot that we support that you've put in there, but we'd like some more funding. Give that section of the council a bit more money so you can align your biodiversity work with the biodiversity strategy. You can collaborate better with Greater Wellington. Update our natural capital. It's 5 years old. It's got no targets, no dates. It's essentially a good document, but it's lacking and it's out of date. To help ensure biodiversity enhancement is a key in all council projects, and also to get the council ready because this government's probably going to pass the significant natural area legislation, and you need to be ready for it. So some more funding for biodiversity. And we do want to continue the funding for financial incentives for heritage building owners. And overall, we support your budget. And I've now got 5 minutes for questions.
That's wonderful. I think there probably will be some. Councillor Pannett. Sorry. No, you can go first.
Look, thanks for your submission and all the work that you do. I would, of course, agree with you about stormwater, but we are pumping a lot of money into wastewater. Do you have any sense of how much would be required to address some of the issues that you're concerned about?
It doesn't have to cost a fortune. A lot of it's, well, you could do it through changes to the district plan and rules, but you also could do it immediately through a bit of money for a bit of public education. Like in Nelson, which I tend to refer to too much, they got all the primary schools to do murals around stormwater drains and supermarket car parks. You know, this goes to the sea, and there were pictures of octopus and things. They got scouts and service clubs to do goldfish on every stormwater drain, and a seroptimist said to me, "I've painted 40 goldfish, I do know where this water goes." And she wasn't in the slightest bit interested in fresh water, but she was a seroptimist. She said, "This is my 40th goldfish." There's things like that will help. Labelling, when a stream goes in a culvert under the road, just a wee sign saying, you know, Waitawi Stream or whatever it is. They're not necessarily expensive, but it all helps. But yes, it would be better if the current rules were followed. i.e. don't build within 5 metres of a stream. Be really good if your officers knew that the streams were there and that they checked that it was within 5 metres of a stream, you know, all these things.
What else, if there's investment, where would you like the council to put, you know, like maybe in the next long-term plan for stormwater?
Insist on water-sensitive urban design and help them achieve it. Like some of that is helping them with, you know, education and procedures and, you know.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Calvert and then Councillor O'Neill.
Hi, just very quick. Given the environmental reference groups, one of our advisory groups, how have you felt the ability for you to feed into the draft long-term plan, as opposed to coming in at the end from a consultation perspective?
We did have some opportunity and we did have a workshop, but it could have been better.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill, sorry. And then the Mayor.
Thank you. I'm going to get down in the weeds. So currently, council only has enough money to manage 8% of all of our significant natural areas proposed in Wellington. And a tension that we have with the community is between weed management of areas that are visible or weed managing places that are of significant SNAs. So as someone from the ERG, where do you think we should be prioritising weed management in our city, and did you have a view on whether we should go for SNAs or more things like town belt or other corridors?
Absolutely areas of high biodiversity value, because if you lose it, it's gone. And restoration's all very well, but it's almost impossible to, well, maybe in 100 years or 2 or 3, to restore something back with all the insect communities and the fungal communities and the plant communities. It's very, very difficult. So your highest priority is to actually keep what you've got, keep the Darwin's barberry out, keep the banana passion fruit and the old man's bed out. Yes, it's also important to do the town belt, but you maybe even could put up a sign, this is old man's bed, if you have any in your property, remove it. You know, maybe if you have... But no, keep your biodiversity value you've got.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, thanks. The Mayor.
Look, thank you. You said the government might legislate for SNAs.
We'll bring in the national policy statement.
What do you see that as being? Okay.
Can you speak a little closer to the microphone?
You said the government might legislate for SNAs. So you're familiar with the work we're doing as part of the spatial plan, which has identified a whole host of SNAs, and that's our intention to put that into the district plan. Is there anything different that you see happening as a result of anything government might do than what we're already planning to do?
Yes, well, it's hard to know because there's been a change of minister and things morph, but they have broken SNAs into higher, medium and lower value, and Wellington City hasn't. And I think it's important to have the different values, because for high value ones, you shouldn't be allowed to do anything. For lower value ones, there could be more leniency in terms of what could be done. Yes, it's a district plan thing, but you need to get ready for it. Well, I don't think so.
Debating across the table, sorry.
Anyway, look, it may or may not happen. I think this government's, well, as we know, is pretty busy. Anyway, yes, don't argue across the table.
All right. Look, thank you very much on behalf, and we'd like to thank you and the ERG for the work that you do, and it's really been very enlightening what you've brought to us today. So thank you.
And if you want the ERG to look at anything, go through officer and ask if there's something that's coming on your table you want an opinion on. For goodness sake, use us. That's what we're there for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely, thank you. So now from Enviro-schools, we have Karen Burgess. Thank you, Karen. You have 10 minutes and the floor is yours.
Is this the little button thing?
Just push the button, the green light will come up.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ahu mairangi te maunga kei te mihi. Ko kumutoto te awa kei te mihi. Ko taranaki whānui te mana whenua kei te mihi. and acknowledgements to you all for the amazing job that you do as councillors, which I imagine is incredibly challenging. So thank you for the time and energy that you put into leading our community, and thank you for supporting Enviro-schools over the years. So today I just wanted to, I guess, point out some of the ways that funding Enviro-schools is a great fit with Wellington City Council's community outcomes and priority objectives. And a couple of things that particularly struck me were the priority objectives 6 and 5. 6 being strong partnerships with mana whenua, which has been something that Enviro-schools has really invested in. And we are really pleased with the journey that we're going on with mana whenua. So, and mana whenua have found it valuable to work with us, and we have found it really, really valuable to work with mana whenua, which is what it's all about. So, yeah, so we support that as a priority for council as well. And I guess number 5, accelerating to zero carbon and a waste-free transition. We support that as well, and a focus, I think, that's really important for us is to focus on more than reducing emissions. So what Enviro-schools offers is a long-term view, and we think what will really help us to achieve things like the Sustainable Development Goals is a generation of citizens who are empowered, informed, and who instinctively think and act in regenerative ways. And so there is more to a sustainable future than reducing emissions right now, which we must do as well. And we think what we have to offer is in terms of that long-term view. So I just wanted to point out a couple of cool things that have been happening in the Enviro-schools sphere. Oh, sorry, I've lost a slide. Never mind. I can tell you anyway, because I have it right here in front of me. So a cool thing that's happened this year has been a lovely Enviro-schools event at Otari Wilton's Bush. And what was neat there is that the Enviro-schools team were able to work with staff from Otari, staff from the Botanic Gardens, and the kids were engaged in exploring life in the leaf litter, and stream life, and life in the ngahere. And I guess what this is for us is that we've found that a connection with nature is absolutely essential if people are going to take action for change. And so that's the thing that we are really focusing on with the schools and centres who we work with, and they're loving it. And yeah, so it's awesome. Another thing that we're finding is making a real difference is just going to try again and see if I can find that little slide. It doesn't want to come. We've got a beautiful thing that happened this term. Is that Peninsula Community Preschool reflected as a Green Gold Enviro-school, and they will be celebrating that shortly, and we'll be inviting lots of you, and if you can come, do come, because they are just the most amazing little centre that is imaginable. So if we can create centres like this and that kind of community and support them to be who they really want to be, that's where the citizens that we need to lead in the future are coming from. And these centres are giving the children a really good start, but they're also influencing the parents and the others in the community. And yeah, so we'll let you know when it's coming up, and please come. So I guess just to let you know the reality of what that means on the ground for a facilitator working in Enviro-schools. So we have a growing network. So there are 42 schools and early childhood centres that are part of the network at the moment, all engaged at different levels of commitment and energy, and they come up and down as time goes on, which is why it's so important to have an ongoing relationship with them. So the facilitator is supporting individual schools and centres, they're communicating with the network, they're providing opportunities for schools and centres to get together, they're maintaining an up-to-date picture of what's happening in the network, and they're collaborating with other partners. And then we have got inquiries from new schools all the time. So we had, it wasn't that bright red on my screen, but hopefully it still stands out. So we've had 7 inquiries from additional schools and centres since January, and they're all, we know that when schools and centres start out, it really helps to work with them in depth, and we haven't got the capacity to do that, and we haven't really got the capacity to work in depth with those within the network who need to either. So that's a little bit what it looks like for a facilitator who's got a 2.5 day a week role to be able to do this. So those of you who know Ari here, our facilitator, and she never looks like that. She always looks calm and poised and really lovely. But I think that might be sometimes how she feels on the inside, and probably we all do. So I guess just letting you know what our situation is, so that we have gradually, Wellington City Council and the other councils.
Excuse me, could I just ask that we pause the handing out of the lollies until we get to an appropriate point in the meeting? Yes, it has been a long day, but we need to pay attention to our submitter. Right, thank you. So where was I up to? So, yeah, Wellington City Council and the other councils in the region who, in our submission, we include our regional statement of collaboration. So all the councils are working together. And over the years, all of the councils have gradually increased funding. We've moved from a funding on a per school or centre basis to funding roles. And in the case of Wellington City Council, from funding from multiple sources to a single source, and this has been a really positive shift. But I'm just really conscious that with the world how it is at the moment, and that there is a really high need for what we do, and that these roles really need to be, we need to be having 0.8 or full-time people in each of our localities. And so we really want to address this regionally with all our partners. And so, yeah, I guess that our contract is up for renewal in the second year of the long-term plan, and we really would love a commitment from all of you to be able to work with us and with the other partners and with Toimata Foundation over the next year to be able to come up with something that's really realistic for our facilitators and can make a real difference for our schools. So currently our funding comes from the Natural Environment Fund, and so I suggested in the submission that perhaps a way to do that could involve increasing the Natural Environment Fund, but we're open to anything. Oh, I've done okay, haven't I? Well, 2 minutes for questions. Yeah. Thank you. And we do have a question from Councillor Pennington and Councillor Fitzsimon. Oh, Councillor Fitzsimon's first.
I was really just going to say thank you for all your work. And I see there's 42 schools and early childhood centres. Does that mean they're sort of like accredited Enviro-schools? And is there a sort of stepping stone? Because I know that some schools are not quite ready to take the full kind of suite of options. But
yeah, so that's a great question. So yes, it's absolutely true that there'll be a full range of engagement across those 42. So there'll be some that are just on the very edges, and there'll be others, and we've got some more that are just on the very edges but have not signed up as Enviro-schools yet, and there'll be others that are really committed to an ongoing journey. So there are a number of that have reflected at Green Gold. We had Paparangi School last year reflected for a second time at Green Gold to show that after 3 years, or actually it was I think 5 years since they'd reflected, that they're still doing all that amazing mahi. So yes, there's a full range, and we do have the bronze, silver, green, gold, which is probably what you mean by accreditation, and we're not entirely comfortable with that. It doesn't really, it sort of satisfies our need to be able to say this is where they're at, but we're really wanting to work more holistically and reflect with schools and centres on just the most important thing is to take next steps. It's not to reach this level right now, it's to take the next step and feel that you can make a difference and move forward. So we're thinking a bit about that accreditation process.
And I'm going to actually allow Councillor Day, because she hasn't had as many questions as you have, Councillor Bennett.
Actually, my question follows on from that quite well. So I've been involved with schools who have gone through Enviro-schools and got to that high level. What do you do to support the schools to stay, I guess, operating at that level? Because sometimes if you lose the key person who's been driving it, how do we make sure schools stay engaged? Because it's such an amazing kaupapa.
So I guess that's exactly what the Enviro-schools network is about. It's about, like, we offer events like Otari and opportunities for teachers to come together and connect with one another. And because what can happen is, even in those schools, to become a green gold Enviro-school, you're supposed to have everything embedded in your strategy, and which is amazing. And it's still incredible what can happen when people leave. So we need to be able to keep those schools, even though they've got to an amazing stage in the network, and keep supported, and offer them those opportunities to reflect again and to connect with. That's, I think, where the national network is so amazing, is that you can be inspired, and there's always new levels of amazingness too.
Thank you very, very much, Karen. It's been very appreciated. Can we just say thank you very much? Can we just save those? We have just a couple more submitters and then a break. So if I may ask just that we save the all right, go and rip into it. But please try, we do have to stay focused. So we now have Mr. Turk from the Ngaio Crofton Downs Residents Association. Mr. Turk, I hope you'll forgive us having a sugar rush. We have, and a bit more to come.
If you're still well behaved.
All right. Now, because you're representing an organisation, you do get 10 minutes. That needs to include questions, and you're very welcome to help yourself as that packet comes around.
I'll wait till I've finished. I won't try and talk with a pineapple lump. Look, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity. So I'm the chair of the Ngaio Crofton Downs Residents Association. Our approach to the submission was that it would be probably more value in encouraging our members to submit on their sort of individual preferences for the 7 major decisions that you've put in front of us. The one exception is Te Atakura, First to Zero, which we support. We believe that council has declared a climate emergency, and therefore it's essential that budget be put towards drawing us back from that. And I should probably declare an interest there, as we have a carbon neutral community project underway, and we're hoping to work with council on that. The reason I wanted to make this oral submission is because we're talking about a 10-year plan here, right? So it's 10 years out, and lots is going to happen there. Circumstances have certainly meant that major decisions are made at the front of the period, and the submission template focuses heavily on those. But only a few months ago, we were talking about Wellington needing to prepare for up to 80,000 more people in through Wellington. For our suburbs, the impact of the spatial plan is exaggerated somewhat because we've got the Johnsonville line running right the whole length of our area. And a quick look at the forecast through the spatial plan by suburb shows that about 16% of the expected growth is going to be along that railway line. Does Wellington City still have the capacity to invest for the growth signalled by the spatial plan that the long-term plan puts in front of us? After the 7 big decisions that the long-term plan puts in front of us. And what is the capacity of the Johnsonville line? It should not attract through intensification demand for its services beyond what it is able to deliver, or beyond the investment that is prepared to be made into that line. I see transport as a huge issue for Wellington over the next few years. There's several things happening. We've got the bus priority plan. The draft was put out in December 2019, and I'm not sure where that's gone to. The regional authority has recently put out the land transport plan and the public transport plans. We've got the North Island ferry terminal and possible transport hub that's going to impact on traffic through Wellington. and let's get Wellington moving. And because this focuses on the sort of Narronga Gorge to Airport corridor, it may not impact on us directly and help us through our problems. And there's a degree of sort of lack of confidence, I guess, that all these different things aren't particularly well integrated. They're all happening by themselves. And there's some big projects in front of Wellington that are going to take a long time to resolve. We've already been talking about some of them for a long time. For example, again, looking at the spatial plan, about 10% of the growth is going to occur through the Karori Tunnel from the city. Another 7% is going to occur through the Mount Vic Tunnel. So there's a number of bottlenecks in front of Wellington, I think. And the message I'm trying to get here is that growth is going to happen for Wellington, and there's a fair bit of concern out in the communities, and not just in our residents association, that it may not be particularly well catered for. So please make sure that after these 7 big decisions in front of us in the 10-year plan, that room is left to make Wellington growth over the next 30 years quality growth, right? Not just what can we afford. The spatial plan is due for approval in a couple of months, I think. Next month. So it's probably a bit short-sighted to say we can't plan for what's clearly signalled in that spatial plan because it's not yet approved. It's refreshing that the long-term plan says our city is growing and we'll need to continue to invest in community infrastructure to support our residents, including parks, community centres and halls. Now, I think that's a message that came through quite strongly through the spatial plan consultation. But residents' confidence is eroded a bit when we also read about social housing, and there's only 3 years' worth of capital funding allowed for that until a sustainable solution is agreed by council. And of course that was picked up by the audit report, which also reflected on some of the risk of delivery of work because of other large infrastructure projects. So while you're assuming alternative funding sources for some of these big ticket items, I just hope the council is taking a prudent approach to the risk and making sure that you do leave enough in the budget to respond to the growth that's going to hit us over the next few years. Just wanted to also make a couple of other points. Some of you around the table know that I don't have a particularly high view of council's compliance procedures. So I've got to take the opportunity to get that in. But all I'll say is, so long as council chooses which environment court conditions to apply and which it will not, and puts residents low in the chain, then what you plan for around this table might not be exactly what you get. And to finish, just a couple of comments about engagement over the long-term plan. You've really got to thank your engagement team who've done a good job. They sent out an email advising residents of their activities on the 25th of March. Without that, your website rolled over on the 7th of April. The consultation went live, but it was at least late into the next day before that rolled over, and said the consultation was active with activities beginning on the 8th of April, the next day at Te Papa, and locally on the 9th of April in Kandala and the 12th of April in Ngaio. So we'd really appreciate more notice of what's happening, and do that and you'll get more people coming along, I'm sure. So that's my submission. I'm sure planning can be a tiring and thankless job at times, but I'm sure also that we're all aiming for the same vibrant city. So, and I think some of the intensity of the feedback that I hear has happened is really a positive sign of the passion that our residents have for the city. So, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions? I actually do have would just like to drill down a little bit more into that engagement thing that you raised. So you're saying that the council, our engagement staff, let people know well in advance. So did you get an email or?
Yes, we get a regular email from things that are happening in council. So we got the list of engagement activities on the 25th of March. Didn't come to me, unfortunately, because I think there was a glitch just on that one email with my email address, which had just changed, but it was definitely sent out, so that was appreciated.
But the point that you were making was that it didn't go on the website until quite a bit of a delay getting it on the website.
Consultation went live on the 6th of April through till at least 7th of April, late in the afternoon. It was showing up on your website under, was it Te Kura Mai, that it was consultation due. So there was, and then once it flipped over, you had to go to at least the second page, and hidden right down the bottom was a link to activities, so it wasn't easy to find.
Okay, thank you. I see the Mayor had his hand up, and then we have Councillor Paul.
Ian, just by way of explanation, that I suspect, we can probably find out for you, but I suspect that was because the audit office, the auditors didn't do their auditing the time we expected, and that we actually didn't sign it off until the 6th or the 7th, whichever date it was, so we couldn't actually put it live until we'd actually approved it.
Okay.
So that was, yeah.
Thanks for that clarification too, Mr Mayor. Councillor Paul.
Thanks for your submission. I really enjoyed it, and thanks for your work on the zero carbon community as well. I just wondered, could you just expand a bit on the compliance point? Are you saying kind of doesn't matter what rules we're making if they're not being, or do you have any examples of that?
I gave a couple of examples last time I was here. I have a fundamental disagreement, I guess. I believe that if, particularly in cases where residents appeal, so it's gone to mitigation, and we're sitting in a room, residents have their lawyer present, council's there with their lawyer, developers are there with their lawyer, and at mitigation you agree that to a set of conditions, then those conditions apply. And council officers shouldn't be able to say, this condition is not doable, we've got to find an alternative, without addressing it with the other parties. It may be a good solution, but it shouldn't be done unilaterally without other parties' agreement.
Okay, thank you. I think we have probably come to the end of our time, but thank you very much for your submission.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah.
I will take one now.
And I'd like to invite Jill Ford up to the table. Jill, do feel free to take a pineapple lump either now or later.
I don't eat sweets.
Thoughtfully provided for us by Councillor Young. Right, so you have 5 minutes as an individual, and we're waiting with eagerness to hear what you have to say.
Right.
Thank you.
So I've got 3 key areas: transport, waste, water, stroke saving money. So you guys have declared a climate crisis, and we now need urgently to see those words put into action. 53% of our CO2 emissions are transport. The next highest is energy use in buildings, followed by waste. And on average, 30% of waste in landfill is organic, which produces lots of methane. Transport. A major new report came out this morning by the Ministry of Transport that states to achieve a zero carbon target requires a major transformation of the transport system. Street changes to support public transport and active travel could potentially be made swiftly and cost effectively, as it is possible to reallocate space on existing streets to deliver mode shift without building new major infrastructure. This is a 2 birds in 1 stone approach. You reduce ease of access for cars while increasing ease of access for buses, cyclists and pedestrians. The recent Stuff's Now Next survey shows that 50% of respondents said they want to make their transport habits more sustainable. We know people want to get around easily by walking, cycling and taking public transport. But my experience in Wellington is it's not safe or easy to get around by those means of public transport. In 10 years, you've just built 16 k's of cycle lane. Consequently, over 96% of people don't cycle to commute, and the biggest reason is safety. Buses then get held up from congestion by cars, they run late, less people use them and drive. Walking. Pretty much every traffic light is prioritised to vehicle transport. So you stand for ages waiting, then you get less than 10 seconds to rush across the road before it flashes red again. And if it's raining, you get really wet in Newtown. So what will bring about change? Public transport and active transport options that are safe, more convenient, accessible and cheaper than using your own vehicle. You need to use the carrot and the stick. We need traffic lights that are more responsive to pedestrians, more zebra crossings, an integrated network of dedicated bus lanes to enable frequent and reliable buses, an integrated network of cycle lanes. These are much cheaper and quicker and less disruptive than putting in light rail. All residential and shopping streets should be 30 kilometres, and less free parking on streets, and increase the residents-only areas and charge more. Waste, a topic I'm familiar with Laurie. Currently, it's not easy to compost your kitchen or garden waste unless you are highly motivated, have a garden, or can get Kai Cycle to come and take it away. Consequently, we have a landfill full of organic waste, lots of methane, and you're planning on expanding it at the cost of tens of millions. I therefore support sludge minimisation through alternative funding with organic composting of kitchen and garden waste to reduce the amount of waste in our landfill. Christchurch Council have been doing this for over 12 years. They treat their sludge to create biosolids, that goes to living earth. Any cost to the council is offset by what would be the cost of landfill. And in case you don't know, landfill costs are increasing every year. In terms of the full rates increase, I don't support it because there was nothing that I could find that even considered reducing costs. More user charges. I pay to go to a swimming pool, use a sports ground, but for some reason, museum and art galleries, you don't get charged to go. You could perhaps consider reducing some of the bureaucracy in the council staff. Finally, water charges. Many cities and towns in New Zealand now charge for the supply of water. And where this has happened, there has been significant reductions in water use. This reduces running costs, demand on infrastructure, harm to the environment, and reduces demand for heating water, so reducing the need to build new infrastructure. The lack of progressive progress has made me pretty depressed about living in Wellington.
Thank you, Jo. I actually think we've probably run out of time for questions, but we're just about to have a break.
Everybody knows where to get hold of me.
Yeah, and you're welcome to stay and join us for a cup of tea, and there will no doubt be lots of people that want to do coffee. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so look, I'm going to suggest we now have a break for 10 minutes. I don't know it's short, but just a, time. to the table. Are you next up, are you? Okay, so actually I did have somebody else, but I think we can. Tom, sorry, I've actually got a couple just before you. So there's the Thompson Property Group, Lewis Thompson. They're not here. And then we've got Fred Marshall. Is Fred here? So in actual fact, yes, Emma and Anne, you are next. So you have 5 minutes, and that needs to include questions.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to the Council. Today I want to speak about why fully funding our climate commitments and fully funding the accelerated cycle package is really important to our whānau. We use a bike as our main means of getting around the city, and as the council document recognises, one of the main things that the council can do in terms of climate action is mode shift away from private car use towards sustainable forms of transport, walking, public transport and biking. Biking's a form of transport that currently doesn't feel safe a lot of the time. And it seems really, really challenging sometimes to get around the city by bike, especially when we're trying to do it as a family. At the moment, we normally get around with Anne riding on the back of my bike, but she's getting to the stage where she wants to ride her own bike now. And we... Sometimes. So Anne's here with me because it's after school, so I thought I'd let Anne say for a couple of minutes what would make it possible for her to feel like she can ride safely in the city.
If we put fences on cycleways, that would make me feel more happy riding in the city.
Yeah. And having a cycle network that connects up recognises that cycling is not just a form of leisure, but is a way of getting to the places we need to get to during our week. The Newtown to Kilburnie connection is one we use often, and that Crawford Road route is just something that makes getting from after school over to the ASB Centre to floorball feel much safer than that road once did. We know what cycleways can do, and I want to encourage the council, as part of its commitment to climate action, to fully commit to funding the full accelerated package, so that we have a network that doesn't just work for confident cyclists like me who are probably going to cycle no matter what, but actually serves Wellingtonians of all ages and all abilities who want to give commuting by bike a go. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may ask a question, we had a conversation during the break about sight lines and visibility. What more could the council be doing just to make sure, even without the cycle lanes, that just regular little suburban streets are safer for you and for Anne?
Thanks, Sarah. As will come as no surprise, the most dangerous points feel like intersections, particularly intersections where there are often large vehicles parked very close to intersections, and particularly where the rules around where you can and can't park near intersections doesn't necessarily take into account things like the slope of the hills in Wellington, and the increasing size of many vehicles parked on the road. And also take into account the difference between looking from the point of view of me to looking from the point of view of Anne. There's a huge difference in what we can see, and for independent mobility, having those clear sight lines by moving parking away from intersections means that we can use the road more safely and recognises the different road users we have.
Thank you for that. Now, I thought I saw Councillor Foon.
Kia ora, Emma, and thank you so much for coming in. I guess the question, one of the challenges we have is sometimes, even for safety reasons, but we want to do the cycleway properly, and maybe that's been nicknamed the gold-plated cycleway. But I think from a user perspective, I guess if you think about the Rugby Street rise, to come toward in Mount Cook, but what do you, as a parent or a family on bikes, what do you, is the gold-plated important, or is it just having the fence up, as Anne outlined?
Yeah. Having some form of separation. So having physical separation. Paint isn't protection. I think when Anne was talking fence, Anne was also suggesting things like planter boxes or things that give us space from the traffic, that mean as a family, we know we're all going to be safe. And having our cycle network join up so the whole thing works. So for us to be on the road, we really do need a protected cycle network.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. That 5 minutes goes fast, but thank you very much. Okay. So we actually do have the Thompson property group on Zoom now. So welcome.
Hello.
Welcome to Lewis, is it?
It's Thompson, actually, but Lewis is my first name.
Thompson.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh, good, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity today. Much appreciated, and for fitting me in. I am concerned about quite a few things, but the debt and rates that the council needs and is proposing, I'm concerned that they stick within their borrowing limits, and that they must bear in mind that interest rates will rise. Like all councils, there needs to be a good hard look at all council expenditure to see how things are being done, why they're being done, and could they be done more efficiently, or could it be done more quickly, and could be done perhaps with less staff input. Also, it is really necessary to keep the city running well, and some of the nice to haves or the trendy things may have to wait. Another way to look at it is, if they wait and save some money now and some debt, will they be in a better position in the future to do something and do it well? Because it's a people, rather than wasting money, as is some trendy and temporary expenditure does cause. I think they need to keep the rates to a minimum that enables, but still enables the work to be achieved. I was disappointed to hear that the council voted to have 2 co-opted Maori members on council committees as voting members, because that wasn't approved by the electorate, and I think it's a cost to the ratepayer of another $220,000 a year. Plus, they've got the voting rights. And Maori wards, I was also against that, because I don't think that is necessary. As you look at Pairua Council, which already has several Maori members already on the council in their own right. The climate emergency, I feel far too much attention's just been paid to it, rather than doing what is maybe needed when it is needed. And rather than allocating 18 to 30 million, I think it'd be better to have the money used when it is needed and if it is needed, because otherwise it can just become a gravy train. And things like electric cars are all very nice, but they are costly to buy. Their production creates pollution, and in the future, the disposal of the batteries also creates another lot of pollution. I believe it is far better to use the current fleet till it needs replacement, and Wellington is fortunate in already having an electrified rail network. Also, I don't believe council responsibility to pay contractors a living wage. Council are not a social welfare department, and it's up to the contractors to decide what their staff get paid, and I would think most of them would be paying that anyway. The fees and charges need to be kept as low as possible to encourage development of the needed facilities and housing. And it must be remembered, because of capital value rating, the more that development takes part, the more rates the council will get in. An example of what I believe is excessive for what we had a development in Tawa here of a joinery workshop, and were required to get a crime prevention report, which also had to be peer reviewed. This was a complete cost and waste of to get a 17-page report, all of which could have been said in a couple of paragraphs. Selling assets, I don't support the council selling assets unless they're underutilised. Things like the airport, I do not support selling, but if they're underutilised and not likely to be, well, they might as well be sold. The other thing is that cycleways, obviously there's been a lot spent on cycleways over the years, and that's good, but I think that rather than going all out at the moment, I think they just need to make sure they spend the money on those that improve the safety of the cyclists the most. I support their plan to have housing encouraged near public transport, because that makes logical sense. I don't know that removing cars and parking from the inner city is a good idea, though, because it will deter people from going to the city, and that is not good for the vibrancy of the city. And earthquake upgrades of council buildings, I think, needs to be an inquiring approach to make sure that it is being done in a logical, practical and economic way. I'm staggered at the cost proposed for some of the strength of the council buildings, and I know from practical experience that there are engineers with varying views on how these things can be done, and I think they really need to ensure that they're getting the best value for money in this department. Reducing the sewage sludge, I think the cost of doing that at the moment is not economic. And in Christchurch, it was brought up there before, they use the gas that they get from the sewage to power the pumps, which makes logical sense. And I think the council needs to wait and monitor the situation, because scientific developments often improve as time goes by. And then they also should adopt, like the council, Christchurch Council, and use as much of the gas as possible. I'd also have a bit of a gripe in that the enthusiastic attitude of the council parking department makes me wonder whether they are actually on a commission, because they don't seem to accept any reasonable excuse for things, and I just feel that that is not good for public relations, and just seems to be a particularly hard-headed attitude. I'm happy to try and answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We do have a question from Councillor Condi.
Thanks, Mr. Thompson. I was just wondering about your comments around earthquake strengthening and making sure we're getting good value for money. One of the things we have around council buildings is, because they're public and civic buildings, it's important that we strengthen them to a high standard. What is your views on that?
Well, I think the standards are designed some of the lower standards are designed so that people get out of them, but the building itself may not be usable afterwards, which is one way of looking at it. And then the other is that if they're, to a really expensive one, like I think they're looking at base isolators and things, so that the building is also survives the earthquake afterwards as well, and is still usable, which is ideal, obviously. But if the cost of it is excessive, as has been pointed out at a meeting in Invercargill, the chances of getting killed in a building in an earthquake are so rare compared with the roads that they should look at shutting all the roads first, because that's the ratio of the thing. And it's unfortunate that the Christchurch earthquake and subsequently those Kaikoura ones have really focused people's minds on it, and it needs to be done, but to what level is the issue, I believe, too.
Thank you. Are there any other further questions? No, it doesn't look like we've got any further questions for you, Mr. Thompson, but thank you very, very much for your presentation.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Right, moving along, we have, I don't believe we've got Mr. Marshall. No, so Michelle Rush, thank you and welcome to the table.
What she's going to say, what are we going to do now?
Is that right now? Okay. Firstly, just want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission, and firstly really want to congratulate all of you on what I thought was actually a really, really good long-term plan overall. I think it's really comprehensive and you've covered a lot of bases, and I appreciate that you are in a very difficult situation with 400 individual service areas to look after, and a budget that, while reasonably generous, isn't quite at the scale of some of our other cities around the country. So congratulations to you all and to the staff who've put this together. What I just want to focus on is a couple of things, including two things I didn't cover in my submission, which I'll say why. But firstly, just the key things that the lovely lady in Little Poppet before me covered off what I wanted to say on cycling. Just to reiterate, that little girl, my girls are now 18 and 20, they're in exactly the same category. Mum, I'm too scared. And I'm like, what have I done wrong? I've tried to raise them as cyclists, but they're too scared. I know that both of them would get on bikes if they weren't so scared, and they're 18 and 20, so I just put that out there for you. That is one of the reasons why I'm suggesting you go for the accelerated cycleway package, so we join things up to go with the great infrastructure you've started to put in. So, but I won't say more on that. I just really want to talk about the pipes. You might recall, some of you, that I actually ran for council last term, and I ran on the pipes. And funnily enough, I was riding my bike down my road in Ngaio just to come here, and for the third time, the same piece of street has exploded again. The third time in about a year. And I understand from when we grilled the guys on the street, because now it's happened several places on the same street, or to our new water pipe, is that the material they had built the laterals out of, which is plastic, keeps bursting. Now, I'm not sure if it's the material at fault or the workmanship that put it in, but I just put it out there to say one of the things I would implore you to do as councillors is ask some very hard questions about OPEX versus CAPEX when making decisions on critical infrastructure. We really, really need to try and get this stuff resilient, well built, and that won't be cheap. But I just want to put that out there because I think that as we look to the future in resilience, we really do need to be looking at operational expenditure, and it may need to be going up. And also, if we are cheap here, it might cause expensive operational expenditure like repeated broken pipes later. So I just wanted to put that out there as sort of a thing for perhaps all of you to think about as you ask the hard questions of staff in the coming years. And so just on that, that's really why I would like to see us do the accelerated, the expensive option for water. This city has majorly underinvested for 60 years. Unfortunately, you are the group wearing the problem. However, I also think ratepayers do need to wear the problem, and I would implore that we do look at as many possible different types of funding options as possible, including maybe special rates per catchment, etc., to try and right this problem, because I see that if we don't do it, we're going to be forever playing catch up, and you'll be continuing to put out lots of money on things like what's happening in my street, rather than us actually just saying, look, we've really got to sort this big problem and get on with it now. So I just wanted to put out there that reason. The other thing I just wanted to talk about is there was nothing in the long-term plan about water meters. I understand that you wanted some work done on a business case first. I would implore that you do that as a matter of priority. In every other part of this country where water meters have gone in, we have seen significant improvements in how water's been used. And I would implore you to look at that. Kapiti is a good example. Auckland's another good example. Related to that, the other area I saw you didn't have anything in, and this is something I haven't put in my submission because basically I forgot. It was late at night. Johnsonville and the redevelopment of the town area, and I understand from your staff that there are discussions happening with Stride. Again, I would see as a matter of priority, I would implore you to look at a complete redevelopment of that area, including a significant new amount of social and other low income housing. And when I say that, I mean nicely done around a proper town square to make the most of the beautiful library and pool we've now got renovated up there. I would really love it if maybe as a project of this council it looked at a couple of major projects with the government through the Kāinga Order and now ability for you to be an urban development authority, bringing together those things and rethinking some of our areas to try and make a big dent on our housing crisis. I was amazed to see in the paper today for $465,000 I could buy 40 square metres of one bedroom in Ngaio in a multi-unit for $465,000, and it was going to cost me $6,000 a year in the the body corporate on top of that. And I thought, right, that's really interesting for 40 square metres.
Michelle,
so just put it out there.
Thank you very much. We have run out of time, which is a shame because there were a couple of questions, but that was
okay.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we are up to Social Change Collective. Thank you. And as an organisation, you will have 10 minutes, but that does need to include questions. Thank you for coming.
Kia ora everyone, my name's Michael Thompson and I volunteer for the Social Change Collective. So we're an organisation, NGO, started in Wellington, we've spread to Auckland. We've actually got Councillor Jill Day on our advisory board, so yeah, thank you. And basically what we do is organise public events to get young people engaged and motivated on social issues. And to connect them with actions they can take to drive change. So our latest event that we ran in Wellington was based on submissions to the council's long-term plan, and so I'm just here to basically share what we got from that. So we're not an interest group, we're not even necessarily presenting one unified view here, but there is very much a common theme from young people that we talk to. So I just wanted to amplify that voice because I think it's really important and represented in front of the council. So it's probably not going to surprise you to say that young people are worried for their future. Young people are worried about housing, about the quality of our houses, about transport, about climate change. So it's probably not going to surprise you. We're aware of decades of underinvestment and aware that that is not just a council thing. There's also the central government has a role to play there. But all the same, we're really heartened to see that the council is stepping up this long-term plan and is taking bold action, and it also probably doesn't surprise you to say that young people have a motivation to see further and faster. So yeah, I just thought I would feed this on to you. So we supported the plan, so thank you so much for everything you've done to make it ambitious and make it future focused. We talked a lot about how it's important to address these issues now rather than later, which you are doing. Participants supported the most ambitious options, as again might not surprise you, around things like enabling active modes of transport and cycling, te Atakura, Three Waters infrastructure. Our rangatahi want to be able to swim in their waterways. They want to be able to walk down Willis Street without pipes bursting. They want to be able to cycle to work. And they have a vision for the future, which is where we can all just get around our cities, have a standard of living that our elders took for granted. And Yeah, I think one thing we questioned was around why, if the council has declared a climate emergency, why we weren't seeing necessarily the same sort of transparency against impact on our climate targets as we did around sort of the budget price tag. Understandably, the council has to pay attention to its debt limits and to its rates, but we also wanted to see how does each of these options sort of play out in terms of our climate crisis, particularly when we've got 10 years left to act, and this is the 10 years for the 10-year plan. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I guess my closing statement is basically just we ask the councillors to make sure that this really is a truly long-term plan and that it's considering the impacts that decisions today have on rangatahi in the future, who will bear the impacts of the decisions one way or another. I think you've made a really good start and I support the long-term plan. I just encourage you to stay the course or make it more ambitious. I wouldn't say no to that either. Yeah. But yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Great. Now, do we have any questions? Yes, we do. So Councillor Foon and then Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, Michael. Thank you, and thank you for your submission. Thank you for bringing up the, how we're measuring climate alongside the budget aspect. What would that look like to you? Like, just how would you want to see that communicated? Yeah, just what would it look like?
I think for me, it could be as light touch or stringent as you wanted. At the very least, you could note alongside the options consistent or not consistent with.
Right. Yeah.
It could be as light touch as you wanted, a high impact on our emissions positively or negatively, or vice versa. You could move towards a measurement impact on what's it going to do to carbon equivalents, but I think the main point here is just to make it visible somehow. Yeah. It's kind of a technical question and a capacity question to ask how to do it, but I think the ambition is that if we're serious about it being a crisis, then why aren't we labelling our options in terms of the most important criteria that we've put in front of us.
Yeah. No, kia ora. Thank you for bringing that up. It's awesome.
Thanks. Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, Michael. Thank you for your submission. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the Social Change Collective and if we'd had some more thinking around Te Ngākau Civic Square or development of central places in our library, if there were specific feedback points on that.
Yeah, so I guess our participants were supportive of we're supportive of redeveloping the library and giving it the funding that it needs. We, for the purposes of time in our workshop, didn't go too detailed on all of the items. We focused a lot of our attention on sort of the three waters, the Te Atakura, cycleways and so on. But yeah, I don't have too much detailed comments on Te Ngākau.
Are there other questions? Well, that being the case, thank you very much, Michael, for coming and sharing the views of the Social Change Collective. We've enjoyed hearing them. Next up is Richard Moore from Megavision Limited, trading as Polly Palace. Richard doesn't appear to be here, so we'll move on. Jason Woodruff. Welcome, Jason. So, Jason, as an individual, you have 5 minutes, including questions. Thank you. Floor is yours.
Awesome. Should I just go for it? So, kia ora, everybody. My name is Jason Woodruff. I'm making this submission as just a citizen of Wellington, and I'm particularly passionate about the Wellington skate survey that you guys have recently conducted. So I'd just like to say, ka pai, awesome work. The skateboarding community is one that often struggles to engage with politics and structures like the council. So it was really awesome to feel like our community's voice was validated. So thank you guys. On that, we'd really like to see that you guys continue this great work and to move forward. And I also think that there is a lot of benefits that this can bring to the city as a whole. There are a lot of examples around the world and even in New Zealand where a thriving skate community benefits the economy and the culture of the cities that it thrives in. We only need to look at Auckland. In Auckland in 2001, they had a sum total of 9 skate parks developed by the council. They now have over 25 and regularly host major events from international companies, have several thriving skate distribution companies which facilitate our rangatahi to have the opportunities to grow in the sport. And to be honest, the sport is growing. It's growing fast. I'm not sure if any of you are aware, but we currently have the world's biggest skateboard touring New Zealand, promoting the Olympic tour. So it may very soon be stopping in Wellington. And it does show that there is huge growth in the sport, and New Zealand skateboarders are up there as some of the best in the world. We have some real talent in this country, and right now often our talent feels like it's struggled to be supported. And that's why I'm keen to hear how you guys plan on enacting the findings of that skate survey, as well as kind of making a couple suggestions. I know one of the key findings, obviously, was build more skate parks. Big shocker. The thing is about that is that it's really cool to build skate parks, but we really need to make sure that there is a strong co-design process in that thing. The Schaefer Skate Park in Waitangi Park is a great facility. It's huge, but it was very obvious that it's not been done in strong co-design with skateboarders. There are many facilities or parts of that facility that are almost unusable due to kind of gentrification of it. There's planters in places that make some obstacles completely inaccessible to use, and it shows that there was a lack of co-design in that process. Whereas on the flip side of it, in Wellington at the moment, 2 of the most used skate parks, the DIY park behind the hospital and Treetops, both built and funded by skateboarders, and they're probably the most used. The other side of it is, I'm sure you guys have all probably been cut off by somebody flying past you on the sidewalk skateboarding. A way that other councils around the world have looked at making this less of an issue is by creating hybrid skate public spots. I know recently that the University of Melbourne has created a plaza, looks like an amazing, beautiful plaza with a lot of great architecture, and it's actually been designed so that skateboarding won't damage the facilities there, and it can be used. Another example is the Museum of Arts and Culture in Barcelona, one of the world's best skate spots, again designed in this way so that public and skaters can, or any extreme sports person can use this park in a way. I know that Wellington already reaps the benefits of major events like Bowlzilla and Artzilla that come along, and so it's really about tying in our approach of, yes, we want to get these economic benefits and the cultural benefits of having a skate community in Wellington, but we do need to do the groundwork. We need to put in those support structures, excuse me, whether that be engaging with the Wellington Skateboarding Association, more engagement directly with the community through surveys like this, or engaging with some of the construction companies that work specifically in the skateboarding sector, namely Rich Landscapes and Acid Skateboard Designs, both a wealth of experience. So, yeah. And open to any questions. Sorry, that was
Yes,
very
there
fast.
are actually. So Councillor Sparrow, and then Councillor Fitzsimons, and then Councillor Bennett. I think we'll probably only have time for 2.
Mine's very quick. Yeah, thank you for that. Certainly potential for more skate parks. How big is the world's biggest skateboard?
I know that it has to be put onto the back of a double-section truck, so it's
Oh my
quite
goodness.
big.
Oh,
Yeah,
trust you to ask that.
try organise a ride.
Yes.
We'll finish up with Councillor Fitzsimons.
Oh, just 2 quick questions. Treetops. I had a constituent contact me recently and say that needs significant upgrading, and they were a very well-meaning person who doesn't do skateboarding. But I just want to know whether you agreed with them or not. They weren't. They were just thinking. They were just sort of trying to advance on behalf of skateboarders while being respectful of them. So you'd be an interesting person to test that with.
I 100% agree. Everything that's up at Treetops is built by skateboarders themselves. we do a good job with what we have, but we're no construction company. So any support that leans into that would be very much appreciated by the skateboarding.
All right. Well, you've got an ally in the community. The other question was just about the one you were saying about opposite Wakefield Park, which is James Bellich Park. Is that where you meant where that wasn't co-designed?
Sorry, Waitangi Park.
Waitangi Park.
I didn't mean that it was not co-designed.
No.
I believe
There were problems with it. I've got the wrong park. Thank you.
Got the wrong park. All right, thank you very much. I sense that there are probably a lot of other questions, but thank you for your presentation.
Thank you for having me, guys.
Right, well, we are making progress. So we have Matthew Sol. Oh, okay. Is he not here?
Not here yet.
Okay, so is Laura here from... Oh, Brad, okay.
Laura's coming on the way at the moment. If the committee might indulge us.
All right, we might just have a few minutes. Somehow we've caught up, just slightly.
Can I suggest that sometimes organisations are essentially companies, and I wonder whether they actually need to be treated as individuals when they're not representing an organisation like the Youth Council, and they do get a bit longer. Just because they've got a company, I've got a company, and if I came with my company, should I get 10 minutes?
Okay, I think this isn't a conversation we can have right now, but it is a good question and one we could consider. Can I just have a quick show of hands of who can stay for the next session? We will be having a break and some proper food. Yeah, after 5:30. Okay. Okay, well, I'm hoping there's a good number of us because, that's the point. But okay. Oh, I don't think that's possible on Zoom. No. Right, so we have our two reps from the Wellington City Council Youth Council, and I'd like to invite them to the table. And as an organisation, you do get 10 minutes.
Organisation sounds very formal
with a group with a title. Right,
we're more official.
The floor is yours.
Kia ora. I think everyone here knows us, but for the sake of formalities, I'm Laura and this is Brad. I'm the chairperson of Wellington City Youth Council, and Brad is one of our youth councillors among many other titles. Thank you so much for hearing us today. I just wanted to start off with a slight comment that we had on the long-term plan that is sort of outside of the standard 7 areas of consultation. As a group, we were quite surprised to see the lack of mention in the long-term plan about what the council is doing to proactively assist with housing in Wellington. It was a little bit disheartening considering how much time we spent last year going through the draft spatial plan and how lengthy the discussion was around that, to then see that not be taken through into the long-term plan. Although we as a group are very lucky in the sense if we do get an inside sort of look into where the council is going in many different areas, but for the average Wellingtonian, they see this as your budget for the next 10 years, and to see very, very little on housing in there is extremely disappointing. It seems like there's been a lack of thought going forward as to how we're actually going to address such a major issue. Whilst we have in this long-term plan looked at issues such as water pipes and things like that, which are also equally important, housing is sort of the main topic in Wellington as far as discussion goes on affordability and long-term planning. So that was quite disappointing to see a lack of that discussion in there. Then Brad's going to talk about some of the other sections.
Yes, just to highlight, I think Youth Council has been a fairly vocal supporter of more housing in Wellington, and we've put that forward in our submission again, noting that, as Laura said, this is the 10-year budget, and that in a sense it helps set the direction both for funding but also for the future of the city, and sends a strong signal across the city of where Council's investment intentions are. Without that focus on housing, we are a little bit stumped as to exactly what Council's view on housing going forward is. Related to that, or I guess moving through that, I'll discuss briefly a few of the points of the 7 main consultation areas, and then hand back to Laura for the others before we take your question. First one obviously is water, which is connected in a very strong sense to the housing focus. Important that we ensure that if there are houses, they can get their water to and from each dwelling, and our focus there has been very much a modified option 2, if you will. We note that there are capacity constraints, and similar when it comes to providing additional water, but at the same time, again, this is direction setting, and if Wellington doesn't make a strong commitment to invest in our water infrastructure at the highest possible level, then in a sense we're sending a message that, look, we're just not willing to go quite far enough. We also note, of course, that there's an uncertainty over exactly what sort of funding is required in the short term without full information about the pipes network. In a sense, that makes sense to hold a bit more funding back in years 1 through 3. Once we know how much we need to spend on the water pipes, we should be injecting far more of it, in Youth Council's opinion. So a modified option 2, slightly lower to start with, but then rising throughout the forecast period, years 4 through 10. We also have quite a focus, and I'm not going to dwell on the wastewater laterals. I think that's a waste of probably all of our time. We're supportive of Council's preferred option there for the common sense approach that it takes. When it comes to the likes of the Central Library, Youth Council again has been very forthright on its views around how quickly we need to get that most critical part of Wellington's social infrastructure moving again. In Youth Council's view, we'd rather that we see some things completed as swiftly as possible, in this case the Central Library, by breaching the debt limit in the early years, instead of having lots of different parts of Wellington half finished but unusable throughout the entire forecast period. We can't do everything, that's abundantly clear. Let's get done what we can in the short term, work on the rest as we move through. Lastly, Youth Council, of course, funnily enough, has a fair interest in sludge and similar. We support option 4, of course, to move a little bit of that off balance sheet, although if that option of an SPV doesn't pull off, we're also equally happy to support option 3. Our overriding concern is that let's not make it so that we have to create more rubbish just so that Wellingtonians can poop. And so a very clear focus there. I mean, look, I say that, but let's be clear, that's essentially the decision that's coming through there. Youth Council thinks that that's a pretty bad equation to be working for. Let's reduce that equation as much as we can. Laura.
All right. As far as some of the other areas of the plan go, Youth Council has always and will continue to be major supporters of the Te Atakura plan. Funding that to the full extent possible is always going to be the direction that Youth Council takes, particularly as Council's youth advisory team. Looking into our future and how we can best support enabling that future is always going to be of utmost importance to us. When looking at Civic Square, we were generally supportive of Council preferred option of option 1, however with a few changes. Much of the discussion in this section is talking about trying to bring life back to Civic Square, trying to make it the thriving centre of the city, our cultural centre, and we don't see that happening without being very intentional on who the tenants in those buildings are. We look at Lambton Quay, we look at the terrace after hours, after your working hours, and they're dead zones. There's nothing going on there. We don't want to see the same thing happen with Civic Square, which, based on where it is, has a really great potential. It's close to Cuba and all of that sort of cultural area. We don't want to see that ending up being just dead space after hours. So whilst we are generally supportive of demolishing the buildings, rebuilding them, doing whatever leases you have to get them built, we want council to be intentional in those leases of who's going to be using those buildings. So looking at options like the New Zealand School of Music and other community groups, just trying to focus on housing groups and communities in there that aren't just going to be your 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, because if you do that, you're not going to achieve the overall goals of what we're trying to get with that area. As far as cycleways go, we are supportive of option 3 as well, making sure that we're able to really build up those cycleways. We did have a lot of discussion in our group between option 3 and 4, because ideally we'd like to be able to do everything and fund everything. However, we did come to the conclusion that option 3 is sort of a trade-off, because we are looking to make sure that council's still able to have the funding to put elsewhere, such as the youth hub that we're so strongly pushing for at the moment, which is another thing that we've mentioned in our written submission, of trying to make sure that the council is still being aware of where the funding for youth hub is going to come from. Overall, we are generally supportive of each of council's options throughout the long-term plan, just with the caveats mentioned in terms of housing of the different groups of tenants in Te Ngākau, as well as making sure that we are trying to put more of the focus in a tangible manner back on housing, rather than just having these constant discussions of, oh yeah, cool, we need more housing. We need to actually see it in major council documents such as the long-term plan. Happy to take any questions.
Actually have one. So we heard from the Victoria University Students Association that they are actually nervous about extra debt. What's your view?
I think when it comes to Youth Council, and we have discussed this at length in terms of what the different options are, let's be clear that debt will mean that young people inherit greater debt into the future. That's true. At the same time, we'd rather inherit better or high levels of debt and have a city that's functioning than have the city crumble around us and still incur higher debt in the future to fix the problems that take longer to get moving. So in a sense, the longer we wait, the longer these issues come through, which is why, for example, Youth Council is comfortable with a high level of debt, breaching the debt cap in the early years for the likes of Central Library, because we'd rather we get on and fix some things. We're going to have to spend the money anyway. At some point, it's cheap at the moment, and also, again, the longer we leave it, the more we're going to have these issues crop up, and as we've seen with water, the longer it's going to take to correct.
I think this is also a very good example of a sort of ongoing discussion that Youth Council has, in the sense of young people aren't a homogenous group. Even within Youth Council, we struggled to come to conclusions on many of the funding issues. And so if we as an official advisory group can't come to a conclusion, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that there's many differing opinions.
A very fair comment. Now, I think there were a few hands. Yes. Okay, Councillor Matthews, you haven't had too many questions.
No. So I wanted to test you talked about the absence of housing, and I just want to see what you would like to have seen included in there. Was it infrastructure to support growth? Was it us developing ourselves, or anything else that you wanted in there?
I mean, city housing would be a good start from our point of view. That's almost critical because that's council's direct commitment to it. Related to that, there is a lot of funding in terms of CapEx and similar for infrastructure, but there's no integration there in terms of how that affects our housing outcomes. We know that consents, for example, are lower at the moment in Wellington than they've been before, and part of that, again, is sort of legacy issues. In our mind, it would have made a lot more sense to at least have more mention of how our infrastructure should be unlocking greater development potential. We know that we've got to correct some of our infrastructure deficits of yesteryear, sure, but we also have to unlock more development potential, both intensification and wider elements. In our minds, there was a lot of talk about infrastructure, and that was important, but nowhere in the document was there much of a mention of housing, and if we're not integrating the spatial plan and district plan work with our budget for the city, then we're worried that there won't be that coordination into the future.
Yeah, and I think it was also kind of the signalling, because although in our sort of privileged position, we do have access to councillors on a more informal basis than this. So we are able to get, when we're discussing this in our own meetings, we're able to get signals about, oh, well, this is actually happening on this side, there's money over here. But for the everyday Wellingtonian, you look to this too, and you expect to see all of that information here. So even if there is, as we've had it signalled, money being put elsewhere in terms of city housing and things like that, for it not to be in a long-term plan is quite disappointing.
Thank you. We have run out of time now, but thank you very much. And it was, yeah, as always, very enlightening. Thank you. Now, we do actually have Matthew Sol, and you'll be our last, I think, for today, but come to the table. You have 5 minutes, and we're looking forward to what you have to say to us.
Hey.
Now, the 5 minutes does need to include questions, and it goes by very quickly, I'll warn you.
Okay.
You don't need to have questions, but if you want us to be able to ask the questions, you need to allow a little bit of time.
I don't think I have any really questions to ask. I was just here sort of on behalf of the skateboarding community, just to put in my 2 cents as to how, well, sorry, on behalf of quite a few people, of how we'd like things to go forward. Some things that we do like, some things that we don't like that are happening, and potentially what we can do about it. Has my 5 minutes started?
Yep.
Okay, beautiful. Basically, we as a skateboarding community, we don't feel like we need massive multi-million-dollar projects like, say, big skate parks done for us. We've got quite a few of those already. We would just love to be thought about when it comes to the big cycleways that are being put in that are tens of millions of dollars, maybe putting a little obstacle into that, integrating an obstacle for skateboarding, or 2 or 3, however many, so that we can feel like we are heard and part of the community. We find ourselves down on the brewery, or Max Brewery, around the waterfront there, and we're skateboarding, where we've been kicked out a lot of times. And at the same time, we've had many spectators looking at us fall on our asses or, make our tricks, and it actually feels really good to see the interest that is happening. there is a lot of interest in skateboarding. It's growing. Obviously now it's in the Olympics, and from my point of view, like, it would have been a lot better to have a few more integrations of things that we can skate inside of the community, as opposed to the world's largest skateboard. That, in my mind, and I'm sure in a couple of other skateboarders' minds, is kind of ridiculous. But a little bit of a novelty, but that's okay. Skateboarding, to me and to a lot of other people, is probably one of the most diverse activities that you can come across. You've got people from 9 to 40, even older than that, of every race, ethnicity, all together, but on your own journey. We love it. It takes failure, and we find that those are some of the strongest individuals. It's facing your fears and coming out on top. It's overcoming challenges and going one better. It's finding out who you are and what you can really do. And I think that there's only room to grow within this sport, within Wellington. As I said, we do have a lot of interest from outside of the skateboarding community, and we really love that. As well as that, we feel like some of the big projects that are made for us sometimes are done by architects, but we do, and not skateboarders, not enough input from skateboarders. And we feel like we could just be thought about when it comes to doing the bigger projects. We feel like it is pretty easy to put a little bit of money aside. I'm not talking millions. I'm barely like the small of the thousands. It costs $5,000 to make us a little ledge in the middle of a multi-million-dollar cycleway. I don't think that's unreasonable to ask for. We had my good friend Kevin Francis, who really went out of his way to gather a whole bunch of us, the whole skateboarding community, and a whole lot of us wrote in because of how important this is to us. We would love to be heard, and if that is a possibility, we would love to see the things that we are saying, or to see the things that we are asking for actually come to fruition. So that would make us feel worthy, and will make us feel heard. I might be like running over my words a little bit here, but I'm doing my best with this 5 minutes.
We do have a few questions. You've obviously inspired a few questions. So we've got Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Day.
Councillor O'Neill is...
This is Councillor O'Neill.
Kia ora, Matthew. In our long-term plan, officers have looked at 3 parks, so Waitangi Park, Ian Galloway Park and Tawa Skate Parks for renewals. Have we got those parks right, or do you have other skate parks that you think could use some more upgrades ahead of those ones?
Ian Galloway is just a ramp, so that just needs, that is very small amount of work to get done. Tawa, that is a place that is very close to Johnsonville where we live. We have Newlands that's just about to be redone, and if Tawa was redone, that's just like a bloody training facility for the new upcoming skateboarders that might potentially be our Olympic nominees. So the more areas we have to grow, the better it's going to be, but we don't necessarily need some new big elaborate skate parks.
Cool. Thank you.
I will allow just one more question, and Councillor Day.
Thanks for your presentation. I was going to ask a question. I visited Treetops and the one up near the hospital with staff a few months back, and I was quite interested in the fact that part of the fun for the skate community is actually having some ongoing input into how it looks and being able to change it. And I wonder what your experience is. Have you gone to those parks? And what do you think about those?
Treetops
as
is our favourite.
Yeah.
That is our spot because we crowdfunded.
What makes it your favourite?
We did that. Nobody else helped us do it. What we'd love up there is maybe a few more bins.
Yeah.
So that we, it can get pretty difficult to keep all of our rubbish because we can't control who was there outside of the hours. But we're very proud of that area. We tried to develop and integrate new things into there and make it fun for everybody to come through and have a good time. That's our little safe haven. We feel great.
So because you feel you have a role in making it fun, is that part of the importance of it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. When you're out there skating, you're not thinking about your job. You're not thinking about the dramas you have with your girl. You're not thinking about really anything other than what you were doing with your friends. And I think everybody can appreciate that. Everybody has their community. Everybody has their tribe. And our tribe is the skateboarders, and sometimes it's not even about bloody skateboarding. Just go up there and spend some time with your friends and just sort of release that bullshit that you have with your job or you have with your partner. This sucks, but this is making me feel better.
That's awesome. We should all take up skate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a nice note to end our day on. So thank you for that. Very inspiring.
Wonderful. Have a nice evening.
You too. All right. We will. So we are not actually closing this meeting. We are going to have adjourn for a tea break.